Midnight Game. One evening, after the bowling alley closed, Jason, an employee of the establishment, decided to play a couple of games in complete silence and solitude. As the balls clattered down the lanes, he felt a certain peace and tranquility. But soon he noticed that one of the balls he had launched was not rolling back down the ball return chute, but on its own, straight down the lane. As it stopped at Jason's feet, the balloon seemed alive, as if it had a heart beating in it. As Jason looked closer, he saw shadows flickering through the clear plastic inside the balloon. He stepped back, his heart freezing with terror. When he dared to touch the ball, the track suddenly buzzed as if they were running motors, and the pins at the end of the track began to drop one by one for no apparent reason. Jason tried to start the ball again, but the bowling alley lights went out, and in the darkness he heard soft laughter and whispering, as if someone was playing along with him. When the lights came back on, Jason found all the balls lined up at his feet and the name Charlie on the electronic scoreboard. He quickly packed up and left the building, and from then on he never stayed in a bowling alley alone. After that night, Jason began to avoid late shifts and tried his best not to be alone at the bowling alley. The story of what had happened spread quickly among the staff and visitors. Some questioned the veracity of Jason's story, making fun of his impressionable nature, while others recalled old urban legends about spirits that find no rest within the walls of an old building. A few weeks after the incident, when the emotions had subsided a bit, Jason decided to solve Charlie's mystery. He spent several evenings at the local library trying to find references to any unusual bowling-related events. In the newspaper archives, he found an article about a young man named Charles, a big bowling enthusiast who had tragically died in a car accident in the 60s on his way home after a game. Locals said that Charles promised to be a champion bowler, and his soul never got to leave his favorite place. Armed with this information, Jason decided to have another session at the bowling alley, this time with his friends. They set up the balls again and gathered around the lanes, asked Charlie to make himself known. This time the atmosphere was filled not with fear, but with curiosity and respect for the story of a young man who had passed away. Almost as soon as the session started, something unusual happened. The lights began to flicker, and there were sounds of pins being hit in the air, although all the lanes were empty. This time the team was ready. They did not panic, but watched what was happening. The highlight of the evening was when the words "Thank you" appeared on the electronic scoreboard. After that, the lights in the room stabilized and a sense of calm and peace filled the air. Jason and his friends recounted their experience to the bowling alley owner, who eventually decided to dedicate one of the lanes to Charles' memory. They installed a plaque with Charles' story and his promise to become a champion. Since then, visitors to the bowling alley have treated the lane with special reverence, and some have even brought flowers and gifts in memory of Charlie. Jason still worked at the bowling alley, but now his view of the place had changed. He felt like he was not just an employee, but a custodian of Charlie's history and memory. The story of the Midnight Game and the spirit that continued to bowl even after his death became part of the club's legend, attracting new visitors who wanted to feel connected to the past and perhaps be part of something magical. The bowling alley became a gathering place not only for sports fans but also for paranormal seekers who truly believed in Jason's story. Some of the visitors even claimed to have seen or felt Charlie's presence, especially on quiet evenings when there was almost no one else in the room. They reported unexplained cold currents of air, strange sounds coming out of nowhere, and even bowling balls that seemed to move on their own. Closed lane number 13. Lucky Strike Bowling Alley was a popular place among the people of the town, but one lane, number 13, always remained closed. It was said to be cursed after one of the players died right during a game, his heart failing. His name was Ralph, and he was obsessed with bowling, spending most of his days at the lanes. The staff noticed strange things happening around lane 13. Pins would sometimes fall by themselves, and throws on neighboring lanes were often unexpectedly inaccurate, as if an invisible force was changing their trajectory. But one day the manager decided to reopen the lane for some big tournament. It was a decision he would soon regret. That day, as soon as the first ball rolled down lane 13, the electricity in the entire building started flashing and tension hung in the air. Players began reporting seeing a strange reflection in the shine of the polished lanes that looked like a human figure, but when they turned around, no one was there. By the end of the day, many complained of an unexplained feeling of fear and discomfort, especially as they approached lane 13. In the evening, after the tournament, when everyone had left and only the janitor was left to close the building, he heard the sounds of a ball being thrown and pins falling. It was strange, because all the lanes were turned off. He slowly walked over to lane 13 and saw Ralph. The ghost stood on the throwing lane, slowly turning to the janitor and flickering in the air before disappearing. The next day, the janitor resigned and lane 13 was closed again, this time for what seemed like forever. Soon after these events, rumors of Ralph's ghost began to spread among bowlers, and lane 13 became legendary. Some thrill seekers tried to defy fate by playing on it, but soon realized that some legends are better left untouched. Months later, just before Halloween, the new manager decided to use Ralph's story for marketing purposes, turning the bowling alley into a house of horrors for one night. He made sure lane 13 was safe after a thorough inspection and several blessings from a local priest. Nevertheless, during the event, visitors reported ominous sensations and strange things happening near lane 13. One of the visitors, fascinated by the story and hoping to meet Ralph, picked up the balloon and headed toward the path. To his surprise, as he approached the walkway, the balloon in his hands began to tremble and became as cold as ice. With a whisper and a call of Ralph, "Show yourself," he made a throw. The ball rolled slowly down the track, and when it reached the pins, loud laughter erupted in the room. All the lights went out, and lane 13 was illuminated with a ghostly glow. Suddenly, a figure that looked like Ralph appeared at the pins and grinned in all directions before the ball disappeared into thin air and the lights came back on. From that day forward, no one doubted the existence of Ralph's ghost any longer. Lane 13 was finally closed and covered with a black curtain behind which Ralph was said to have continued to bowl in silence, waiting for someone to dare challenge him again. The story of lane 13 and Ralph's ghost became a local attraction, drawing tourists and paranormal enthusiasts from all over the country. Some came hoping to see a ghost, others to experience the scare for themselves. But one thing was clear: the stories we hear can be much closer to reality than meets the eye, and sometimes the passion for the game can outlast even life itself. Shadows of the past. Megan worked at an old bowling club that was once the pride of a small town. One night, while doing inventory, she heard strange noises. At first, she thought it was just the creaking floors of the old building, but then she saw shadows at the end of the lane that looked like silhouettes of people bowling. The sounds of laughter and raucous conversation filled the air, and Megan could smell the smell of cigarette smoke from past times. When she tried to move closer, the shadows dissolved, leaving behind only the echoes of the past. The next day, Megan learned from the old-timers that years ago, there had been a fire at the club that had killed several people. Since then, her evening shifts had been filled with the feeling that someone was still playing on the club's lanes, invisible to the eye. Megan had always felt a special connection to that old bowling club. Her grandmother would tell stories about spending evenings there when she was young, bowling with friends and listening to music from the jukebox. These stories always made Megan dream of times past, when the club was full of life and laughter. But now, standing in the empty and quiet room, she could only picture those scenes in her imagination. That night, hearing the sounds and seeing the shadows, Megan felt like she was part of a bygone era. She could feel the warmth and joy emanating from these invisible visitors, and she even seemed to be able to pick up the echoes of old melodies playing somewhere in the distance. She realized that these shadows were the souls of those who loved this club as much as she did, and who may not have been able to leave their favorite place even after death. After that night, Megan began to notice other oddities. Sometimes she would find bowling balls neatly lined up in rows, though she was sure she had left them in disarray. Or the pins on the lanes could spontaneously part themselves in preparation for a new game. Once she'd even found 2 glasses of leftover whiskey on the bar, as if someone unseen had decided to take a break from the game. These little signs only reinforced Megan's belief that the old bowling club was still full of life, albeit invisible to most. She started leaving the jukebox on at night, playing songs from the past, hoping to please her invisible guests. And it seemed the shadows really liked the music, because on those nights the sounds of laughter and conversation grew louder, and the atmosphere in the club was filled with warmth and joy. Megan no longer felt alone in the bowling alley. She knew she was sharing it with friends she'd never met, but who had become like family to her. And every time she closed the club and turned out the lights, she said into the darkness, "Good night, friends. See you tomorrow." And it seemed that, in response, the wind gently ruffled the curtains, as if saying goodbye to her until the next meeting.